Hello, everyone. How's it going? Hope you're having a good week so far. Staying safe out there in the crisis. I'm reading your papers. I've read about half of them. I had the not so bright idea of having all my students' essays due at the end of last week, so it's going to be a slog getting through the 60 or so papers that I have to read. But I'm really happy people are turning them in, and you just have to give me something by middle of May, about a month from now. So you can do it. I believe in you. Today, we are discussing this book, A Case of Hysteria, better known by the pseudonym of the patient that Freud's treating, Dora. Her real name is Ida Bauer. And we'll get to that. We'll get to this book in the second video, but at first video, I just want to talk about Freud and his greater significances. There are many ways in which Freud has had a key influence on modern life. Most readily, the greatest example is in the fact that his ideas have been put to use in advertising, which we all encounter constantly on a daily basis from the earliest moments of childhood and cognition as humans. So Freud is a climate we all live in. Anyways, to quote W.H. Auden, the great Irish poet who wrote a beautiful elegy when Freud died. I'm working on my penmanship, you guys. How's that? It's not bad, right? Freud was born in Moravia, and then he died in London, fleeing the Nazis. Freud was Jewish. He dealt with discrimination his whole life, living in Austria, living in Vienna, one of the cultural capitals of the Western world, not least because it's the home of Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven, all that music I love so much. And then in Freud's own lifetime, what we call the second Viennese school. The first Viennese school is Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, and Schubert to some degree. Classical music's classical period. And then when Freud was alive, the modernist period, the invention of atonal music by Schoenberg and his pupils. The most famous are Anton Webern and Alban Berg, but then we shouldn't forget the great Marxist composer. Sorry, I'm getting text. Man named Hans Eisler, great composer, wrote the national anthem for East Germany when it was a country. Okay, so Freud lives in a very heated, very kind of shocking time period. He sees World War I. He dies when World War II is about to break out. And he has this very misanthropic outlook as a result. But what I want to talk to you today is a very famous notion Freud came up with, which is what he called the three humiliations. Three humiliations of modern man. And this is from these you can really name these. They're like scientific experiments or scientific discoveries. And Freud has this great thesis, which is that as scientific knowledge advances and we grow more powerful technologically, the price we're paying for that, there's a cost. The cost is that we are realizing how not significant, because that's childish, how insignificant we are, okay? Man, these three great discoveries, and Freud puts himself on this list. He was never could be accused, never enjoyed a reputation for modesty, Mr. Sigmund Freud. So So the first of these discoveries is, and I think I went over this in class, but I'll do it again anyway, is you can attribute to a guy named Copernicus, who was born at the outset of modernity. Sorry, modern man. Um, Copernicus is, we're talking right around 1500, 1500s, and his famous book, I won't write it all on the board. It's called The Revolution of Celestial Spheres. It was published in 1524. This book, as maybe you know, is credited, although it didn't popularize the idea, it first announced the idea that the Earth is not the center of the universe. We are not the center of the universe. Okay, so what? No. This is a fascinating idea. We used to think, and we still intuitively talk about it this way, that the sun is moving around us. We call it the sunrise and the sunset. Those are those are misnomers. Those are not literally strictly accurate phrases. They're metaphors. The sun is not rising. We are orbiting it and rotating an axis, so it creates the illusion that it's rising and setting and so on. So now Copernicus, it's often said, he didn't want to publish till the end of his life because he was feared persecution. In fact, the book was dedicated to the sitting pope at the time, who was a very secular dude who'd had children and everything. I'm forgetting his name, but he was the inspiration for a great novel called The Charterhouse of Parma by Stendhal, the French-Italian writer. Anyways, we're not at the center of the universe. Where are we? Well, turns out the sun is just one of a bunch of stars. How many stars? God damn, so many. In our galaxy alone, hundreds of billions of stars. Hundreds of billions of stars. It's unfathomable amount of stars. Our galaxy, full of hundreds of billions of stars, is roughly 200,000 light years in diameter from one end to the other. We're kind of on the edge of the galaxy, the Milky Way. To go to the other side on a one-way trip to the other side of the galaxy would take you 200,000 years traveling at the speed of light, the fastest known speed that anything can go. The speed of light is a constant. Nothing can go faster than that. We'd probably never be able to go faster than that, despite what you've seen in Star Wars movies and Star Trek and all this sort of stuff. This space opera, fantasy, sci-fi stuff. Not hard science fiction like The Martian and films like that. So what are we compared to all that? I mean, that's one galaxy. There's hundreds of millions of galaxies in the night sky. We're part of a supercluster of galaxies called Laniakea. What are we compared to that? If there's all these billions of stars and we're just one little planet going around one little star in these giant galaxies that are, billions of light years from here, that is going at the speed of light for a billion years, you'd just be getting there. What are we compared to all that? We're nothing. We're nothing. We're a speck of dust on a speck of dust. We're highly, highly insignificant. We're nothing. But what makes us great, and this is why there's just this awakening here, what makes us great is that we're aware. We can become aware of our own insignificance, okay? So this first humiliation of the modern, and it's not Copernicus who suffers for this discovery, it's Galileo. Galileo popularizes the idea, and he was not very savvy politically, so he offended a lot of people needlessly, and that helped get him in trouble too. So we're not at the center of the universe. I'm coming to Freud in a second. Second of all, Darwin, who we've discussed so much. We discussed the theory of natural selection, this whole idea of survival of the fittest. This is not what makes Darwin controversial. Saying survival of the fittest is saying the economic, political common sense of capitalism. It's saying it is what it is. You live or you survive by getting the skills you need, finding the money you need, or you die. Survival of the fittest is an economic term as much as it is a scientific one. So my point is, what's controversial about Darwin is not the natural selection. What's controversial is the presumption, the assumption, the presupposition that and again we're talking in the 1800s now. Okay, book is published in 1859, Origin of Species. Darwin's idea is that we are not special. We're part of the animal kingdom. Again, this is humiliating. We are related to all other living creatures, and we emerged from them. We're related to them. They are our living family and our extinct ancestors. Okay? We're not special. We're not as creationists as literally religious people are. Please don't be literally religious. Be religious as you want, but don't take the Bible literally. The Bible says so. It says not to take it literally. Not the letter, but the spirit. Okay? No thinking person takes the Bible too literally. That defeats the point of having a spiritual life. You have to interpret it. Okay, so we are not specially created in God's image. We are not. The old atheist notion of we're not specially created in God's image. All right? And then 3, because his name is already up here. So this is this famous list Freud announced in his General Introduction to Psychoanalysis, lectures given in 1915, but then not published until 1920. And then the third person on this list is Freud. And Freud says something probably more extreme. Sorry, goddamn. That's not even, is that a child? Okay, whatever. Freud says, is that right along the, yeah. We are not in control of our individual selves. You do not control your own behavior, your own thinking, your own judgment, your own emotional reactions, your own speech patterns. And these are hitting closer to home, hopefully. I mean, learning, okay, we already basically intuitively in Western societies accept the first of these, that we're not at the center of the universe, right? Because for example, you hear about a comet or eclipse of the sun. We all experience it as a kind of secular scientific moment of awe and education and uniting in our general interest in these things. You know, we take an interest in it just because of the scientific phenomena, not because we think it has any significance pertaining to us. We just appreciate and value it. Compared to, let's say, 1,000 years ago, a comet in the sky, most traditional societies would have been like, oh shit, it's an omen. We gotta sacrifice people or whatever. We'd have an earthquake happens in whatever 1700s Europe. They do human sacrifices to appease the gods, even though they're Christian or whatever. So, so we accept that one. Darwin, it already is getting closer to home and it's hurting more. And people, again, the fact that it's considered controversial shows you that it is humiliating. We are aware of our own insignificance in this regard. And you see that when, if you go to religious school, they may not teach you evolution. Or if you go to school in the South, the students will talk back to the biology professor or teacher when they're just trying to present the most uncontroversial idea, the most unifying, one of the greatest accomplishments in all of human intellectual achievement, the Darwin's theory of evolution. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Evolution itself is not a theory, it's a fact. And this third one, though, is the most controversial. And what is Freud saying by this? We're not in control of ourselves. He's saying what's in control is part of your mind that is there, but you can't access it directly. It's not like, how we can all recall information even though it's not in the tip of our, it's not on, directly in our consciousness. If I asked you right now, you could all tell me your phone number or your address or where you went to high school or, who you went to prom with or whatever. You could all say that kind of stuff, even though it's not always in your consciousness all the time. Freud's talking about information that's there, that's affecting you incredibly, but that's not, you can't access it directly by your will, by your conscious intention. So what is this information called? It's called, famously, it's called the unconscious mind. Not the conscious mind, but the unconscious mind. So it's there, but you can't get to it when you want to. It gets to you. How? What's the evidence? Freud was trained as a doctor, a neurologist. He tried to have a traditional medical career, but neurology was it still is a very limited, not very advanced science discipline, especially medically. A lot of guesswork. The brain's just too complicated. Don't understand it very well. What's the evidence? What's the empirical that is observable with our eyes and ears and with our senses? What's the empirical evidence for the unconscious mind? Well, I won't go exhaustively in this, but I'll give you three, like I just gave you three. I'm always doing law of three stuff, because after three, we lose our comprehension. Three things here. One, errors. Errors in speech and memory and motor skills. So, for example, let's just take one of a speech one. Maybe you all know my political hero who recently was defeated in the presidential primary, Mr. Bernie Sanders. He lost to a dude named Joseph Biden, the former vice president, under someone probably a lot of you guys like, Barack Obama. Biden, as maybe you also are aware, is getting up there in years, and he always had this tendency to speak his mind, and that's not something you're supposed to do as a politician. You're supposed to lie as a rule. Call it gaffe. But these errors of speech, you call them slips of the tongue, or we also call it a Freudian slip, because Freud made it so famous in his book, The Psychopathology of Everyday Life. A slip of the tongue is when you make a mistake in what you're saying, but the mistake reveals something profoundly true about your beliefs and assumptions. You betray your unconscious comes through to consciousness, and you're like, oh my God, shit. So, for example, a common mistake I make, I'll go over to Biden in a second. Biden's making these great gaffes these days, but he always made them. He's making them more frequently now that he's become a little senile mentally as he's aged. But I'll give you a classic one I often do. Monday, I'm teaching a class. It also meets on Wednesday. End of class on Monday, I'll say to the students, okay, blah, 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 you got to do your reading, your paper's due, put your phone away, whatever. You guys know all my it's a community college, all my stupid ass jokes and little sayings I have to say all the time as a teacher. And then I'll make a mistake. At the end, I'll do a mistake that's Freudian. I'll say, and okay, have a great day. I'll see you guys, or have a great weekend. I'll see you next week. What am I talking about? That's not the weekend, it's Monday. I'm going to see them again on Wednesday. What did I just do according to Freud? I betrayed my wish that it was Wednesday and that I was done teaching that class for the week, and I had the time off to go read my books and write my papers in my books, and and I don't have to teach again until Monday. I made a mistake of betraying my wish and saying out loud that I wished it was Wednesday and I didn't have to see the students again in 2 days. Now, just a really brilliant one. I've been saying this a lot. This one since it was said last summer by Biden. Biden said at a campaign event, uh, a very funny thing. He said, uh, uh, "Poor kids are just as smart as white kids." Poor kids are just as smart as white. And then right away he connected correctly. He went, "Poor kids are just as smart as white kids. I mean, rich kids." Now that he made an error there. He meant to say poor kids are just as smart as rich kids, but he said white kids. What does that what does that express? What truth is there that he totally understands unconsciously, and that we all do really? Well, that if that rich and poor in America, not in every single case, but statistically overall, rich and poor is a racial, there's a racial divide to it. You know, there are, of course, a lot of poor whites, uh, but on average, white families are wealthier than families of uh, people of color, black, Hispanic, etc. And that poor kids are just as just as so now I'm messing it up. Poor kids are just as smart as white kids. Again, that racial hierarchy of class hierarchy that's based basically on like kind of skin tone, and the whiter you are. That's true universally in China. It's like that. In Latin America, that the more European, the more pale your skin. There's like a there's like a class dimension to it, not just a appearance and geographical, uh, you know, variety that your skin betrays, but a real class dimension to it. So errors in speech, errors in memory. Again, maybe you've had this experience of, uh, uh, you know the word for something. It's on the tip of your tongue, but for whatever stupid reason, in that particular moment, this temporary forgetting of names. Uh, like a street name or something, or the name of some person that you, of course, but right there and there, you just can't remember. You can't think of it. And then 2 hours later, you're washing dishes, you're walking the dog, doing something totally random, not really paying attention, and it occurs to you, and you're like, oh yeah, LeBron James. Oh yeah, Carl Young. Oh yeah, Carl Cherney. Whatever. Some random person you're familiar with. Their name occurs to you, and what happened? Why weren't you able to say it in that particular moment? Well, because as Freud documents in this book, Psychopathology of Everyday Life, for some stupid reason, the way that information's stored in your brain, it's related to something sensitive in that context, and your brain won't your unconscious mind won't let it out because it's related to sensitive materials. What are sensitive materials for us? They're things related to our sense of self-worth. And our sense of self-worth comes from three things according to Freud: our family, our job, and our love life. That word that you didn't want to say right then and there, that you were trying to say but your unconscious wouldn't let it out, that that word is somehow stored next to sensitive materials from work, family, or love. Interesting notion. And Freud also says if those three things are going good for you, family, work, love, you're okay. Life's okay. Maybe you're not totally miserable like the rest of us. Okay, and then finally, motor skills. This is a hilarious one. But constant little errors in life, Freud says, they're not accidents. They're determined. They're determined by the unconscious and the wishes that it wants to express. So, for example, this is a common one I'll do. I'm going to get on the subway, which I don't do anymore because of the pandemic. But when we used to have a society before this damn pandemic, you got to get on the subway to go somewhere. something I would do because I'm very absent-minded. You know, I'm always lost in my own thought. I'd take out my keys, not my Metro card. I'd take out my keys to my house. Why? What's the error? What's the meaning behind it? Well, I obviously don't want to go on the subway. I want to go home and chill. uh, Telling someone, getting in a cab. This doesn't happen anymore because we use Uber or whatever. But maybe it does if you entered the wrong address in the Uber. You getting in the cab and telling the cabbie the wrong address. What are you doing there? You're not wanting to go where it is you wanted to go. Okay. Then again, little things, little errors of self-harm work like this too. I don't know if you do this very often, but if you've ever bitten your lip or your tongue or your cheek or something while you're eating, often if you analyze what you were thinking about, what was running through your mind right while you did that, it was probably something where you felt like you did something wrong and you wanted to punish yourself. So fascinating thing, these errors of speech. Now let me do one more of these. Just want to get to my notes. So now, what are some other evidences for the unconscious? I'll do the second one now. And at least these two are maybe the most important for understanding the significance of Dora, the case study we're reading. But another evidence of it, so besides errors, is dreams. You know, you go to bed at night, the comedian Mitch Hedberg said, I'm sick of following my dreams. I'm going to ask where they're going and hook up with them later. Because your dreams are telling you intense things. They are all, according to Freud, all fulfilling wishes. Even nightmares, you guys. Nightmares are especially, the wishes are especially primitive. That is from early in life. So they often have to do with desires that you had as a child that you now know are wrong. But unconsciously, they're powerful and they're still there. But they can't surface. They're repressed, except when we're asleep, the conscious mind's gone and the unconscious mind is running the show. And Freud said dreams were fulfilling wishes and that they were the royal road into the unconscious mind. So, for example, when Freud first started treating patients, I mean, he treated women who had, by and large, it was women who had real physical symptoms, like they couldn't talk, they couldn't hear, they had paralysis in an arm, they coughed all the time, they had all kinds of aches and pains, very severe symptoms in some cases. Dora has this stuff, we'll talk about it in a second. And when the doctor examined them, there was no physical malady. So it was like, it's all in your head. So they can either admit you to a sanitarium, you know, the loony bin, which was a fate worse than death at the time, basically tortured, and come out if you weren't already sick, you'd definitely be sick by the time you get out of there. Or they tell you there's nothing wrong with you, go home. Freud had a different proposal along with Alfred Breuer, his colleague, in their book Studies in Hysteria. He said, no, we're gonna have them talk. By talking freely about anything, patients eventually hit upon incredibly profound, important things in their lives, and it seems to help. Okay, he developed this talking cue, but there were stumbling blocks, and they were always trying new things. So dreams became this way to get at this information that you can't consciously get at. Before this, they were trying hypnosis, for example. But just to give you one, so nightmares, recurring dreams, all this sort of stuff has to do with the unconscious mind, okay? And then I'm going to come back in the next video and talk about Dora and this thing, but let me just go over the last of these briefly. Third, love. Love. This is love is unconscious. What does Freud mean by that? He means that, uh, as we say in English, you don't choose actively who you fall in love with. You fall. You're walking along and then you trip. Why? Do you fall in love with someone unconsciously rather than consciously? You can't will yourself to love someone. Um, uh, Although you do have to practice and maintain and cultivate love, nurture it once you have it. Um, why do you not choose it? Why does it choose you unconsciously? Your mind these two unconsciouses have to sort of agree because of a phenomena Freud called transference, which is he discovered really, he first wrote about it and published about it in the case study that we're reading, okay? And the other book we're reading, the Malcolm book, is by and large a kind of commentary on the concept of transference. Uh, Love involves transference, meaning the person, you love them not so much for who they are as for who they remind you of. They have to remind you of someone you loved before. In the cliche, a guy is looking for a girl who's like his mother. That's Freud's main concept, the Oedipus complex. All little boys see their father as a rival for their mother's love. Little girls, vice versa. In homosexuality, or it's the boy loves the father and sees the mother as a rival. Lesbianism, vice versa, etc. And there's a mixture of both. You kind of want attention from both. There's this sort of initial queer or homosexuality to childhood sexual desire. So transference means this, that you basically are looking for someone like someone in your past. It could be a parent, it could be a previous lover, it could be as you get older, it could be they remind you of your siblings and so on, okay? And it's a strange phenomena, this love thing. It's so personal, but then it's impersonal. It's like the person has to remind you of someone, regardless of whether they actually like the person or not, okay? And it involves a lack of choice. So this is very depressing stuff. These ideas of Copernicus, Darwin, and Freud, this humiliations, but it's also should strike you as freeing, as a source of responsibility. At least that's how it's always struck me. That we no gods, no masters, and here we are, just all stuck in this shitty situation together. Third rock from the sun. Emerging from bacteria and barely controlling our own minds. No gods, no masters. Okay, I'm gonna come back with Dora, but this is what you have to see. Is the key thing is that love is about who the person reminds you of in your past. That's Freud's notion. Okay? And we'll talk about how he discovered this through clinical treatment of patients like Dora in a moment.